Story 1. Fire all of the employees without notice because the business was closing that day. My uncle did this. He said if he gave his employees a heads up, they probably would have quit or found a different job, and he wanted their help until the last minute. Story 2. At university, one of my flatmates' mothers died, and they kicked her out of the halls of residence because she no longer had a sponsor. This means if she damaged her room, there was no one else to ask to pay for the repairs. Story 3. I saw a commander order a soldier not to contact his family during his deployment because he needed to focus on the mission. He wrote a no-contact order. The soldier was not allowed to call, email, message, or write letters to his family until his deployment was over, which, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, lasted more than a year. His wife divorced him and took their children because of it. When he returned, he had almost nothing. In the military, a no-contact order is enforceable under Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Breaking this order constitutes a violation that can result in punishment, including court-martial. Story 4. Will not give raises because the company is not performing as well as it could. However, employees take 12 vacations a year, and the business pays for them. Story 5. I remember watching a documentary where Walmart named itself as a beneficiary on the life insurance policies of employees with life-threatening illnesses. Story 6. Budweiser spent $5 million bragging about donating $100,000 worth of water. Weaponized charity. Story 7. My 1,400-person company was acquired by a Fortune 500 company. 1 year later, a group of us were invited to a dinner honoring 25-year veterans who had ensured the company's success during lean times. The next morning, one of those honored came into my office crying because she had just been given 30 minutes to say goodbye. She was being let go. Both companies were the same. At one point in the past, the original company had reduced its workforce by several employees but realized they had made a mistake and rehired them after a week. Supposedly, there was no break in service. After reviewing the old personnel records, the new company changed the start dates for those employees, effectively removing 5 to 8 years of service time toward pension vesting. Story 8. Received just under $1 million in the COVID-19 Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness. They used that amount to buy a vacation home. Story 9. Walmart butchers organized and formed a union. Walmart spent the entire time at the negotiation table lining up a pre-cut, pre-packaged meat supply chain behind the scenes. When the contract went to a vote and was approved, Walmart fired all the butchers and switched to pre-packaged meat in all their stores from then on. Story 10. A woman was arranging sponsorship for a bassinet, and when her baby died, the company asked for it back. Story 11. Monitoring software for remote employees alerts the manager if there is no mouse movement or typing for a specified number of minutes. Story 12. Worked at a place that literally built customer complaints into their business model. They would ship late or mess up small things just to trigger calls, then train us to apologize and offer small perks or discounts. Customers felt like they were being taken care of, but it was all a scripted play to build loyalty and upsell. Felt so slimy I could not do it anymore. Story 13. Fired my father right before he was due for a significant longevity bonus. He was going to use it to increase his retirement savings and retire in 2 years. Story 14. Nestle. This Redditor explains it well. The short version is that in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Nestle decided to try to improve its sales of infant formula in the developing world, most notably Africa. It created a program giving a limited amount of baby formula to new mothers, coupled with an advertising campaign promoting formula as a superior alternative to mother's milk. There are several problems with this. The amount of free formula provided by Nestle covered a period just long enough for many mothers to stop lactating, leaving them without alternatives once their free supply was exhausted. Poor mothers who believed in the benefits of the formula but were unable to afford it regularly and did not fully understand how it worked tried to stretch their supply by adding less powder to the water, leading to undernourished babies. Many mothers given formula lived in areas lacking the infrastructure needed to use it safely, such as uncontaminated water for mixing or fuel for heating water to clean the bottles, leading to illness and sometimes death for their infants. Instructions on the proper use of the formula were not provided in a format understandable to the mothers, due to a lack of translations into local languages or non-written versions for the illiterate, who are many among the targeted populations. Nestle was aware of these issues but remained largely indifferent until they faced consumer backlash and boycotts in Western countries. Nestle has addressed some of these issues over time but still does not act with high ethical standards in this and other areas. Story 15. There was a company in Port Botany who were investigated by the Environmental Protection Authority because the particulate level in their discharged water back into the bay was too high, measured in parts per million. They installed a large pump that drew water from the bay and discharged it together with their waste, which reduced the parts per million level. Story 16. Vulture capitalists seek out companies with large pension funds and find ways to liquidate that money for themselves. It should be illegal, but some politicians made it legal, and the courts upheld such legislation. Story 17. Blew up a rock shelter, which was one of the oldest known sites of human occupation in Australia, with evidence of human habitation dating back 46,000 years. Story 18. Hudson's Bay put thousands of people out of work. Many did not even receive severance pay. However, all the senior executives still received their multimillion-dollar bonuses. This happens repeatedly when bankrupt companies shut down. Story 19. I cannot name names, but a very large corporation wanted to raise their environmental, social, and governance score. So they acquired a startup company that was developing a more efficient battery charging circuit for electric vehicles and then immediately dissolved the company. However, the act of buying it raised their score. Even though they actually did something that harms the effort to combat climate change, it was recognized as an act to support it. Story 20. My old job had a hard time keeping people due to low pay and poor hours. I got promoted, and a few months later, they decided to increase the pay but only for new hires and promotions. I raised concerns which they did not appreciate. I left shortly after. Story 21. Food City in my town throws away any deli and bakery food at the end of the day instead of donating it. They have the 14 and 15-year-old workers take the bread, cakes, and other items out back and smash them so they cannot be retrieved from the dumpster. Story 22. Right before the United States Civil War, a man named Roland White patented the bored-through cylinder for use on revolvers. This innovation meant that instead of slowly loading loose powder and projectiles in the front and a percussion cap on the rear, a person could insert an entire cartridge into the rear of a revolver cylinder quickly and be ready to fire. White gave Smith & Wesson a monopoly on the patent and then sued other manufacturers who tried to copy the idea. The Union Army's chief of ordnance called White an inconvenience and embarrassment due to his patent lawsuits delaying orders for arms needed for the war. Congress stopped an extension of White's patent after he claimed he had not made any money from it. Story 23. Working at a university, when there was a problem in any department, they would use reduction in force as a way to eliminate those they considered problematic. This allowed the university not to pay unemployment benefits. It was a dishonest system. Story 24. Knowingly add sugar to pet food and pet treats to create dental products for pets with bad teeth caused by sugar content. Story 25. When the Ruby Tuesday in our town laid off all their workers and gave them only $100 in severance. Some of the women had faithfully worked there for years. The only person who knew was the manager, and he was transferred to another store that made more money. He did not give the workers any advance notice, even though he had known for a while. It was a bad thing for Ruby Tuesday to do, but this other manager knew his workers' lives, actually knew them as people, and could still act accordingly. Story 26. Giving employees only one day off per week is quite common and unremarkable. However, no one deserves to live like that. Story 27. They laid off just under 50 people each in multiple locations. If they reached 50, they had to pay the worker adjustment and retraining notification. They really did not want to do that, so they handled it in a discreet manner. Story 28. Worked for a company that employed many immigrants. This was years ago, but when business was slow and they needed to reduce staff, they called immigration to arrange a raid. That saved them money on unemployment insurance premiums. Story 29. One of the most striking examples of illegal but unethical corporate practice is Monsanto's ghostwriting of scientific reports to influence regulatory decisions. Monsanto employees secretly authored studies that led the United States Environmental Protection Agency to conclude that their widely used Roundup weed killer did not cause cancer, despite mounting evidence and claims from farmers that it was linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. This manipulation of scientific research, while technically legal, deceived regulators and the public, allowing Monsanto to continue selling a product that potentially endangered health without proper warnings. It is a clear case where legal boundaries were exploited to prioritize profits over public safety, illustrating how companies can use legal loopholes and influence to mask harmful practices under the guise of legitimacy. This tactic not only undermines trust in science and regulation, but also has real-world consequences for people exposed to the chemical. Story 30. Companies paying fines is legal. Companies pay fines for serious violations sometimes, and money has made these violations just another cost of business. Story 31. When companies took troubled asset relief program money meant to help them stay afloat and gave out big bonuses to their executives, the government questioned them. They said those bonuses had been approved earlier in the year. That is not how you keep a company afloat. Story 32. Two brothers were killed when an ice shelf collapsed as they were taking photographs of New Zealand's Fox Glacier while on a driving holiday in 2009. The two men were accompanied by their parents, who watched in horror as their sons were crushed before their eyes. Rental car company New Zealand Car Rental Service tried to bill the parents for the cost of a replacement key for the hire car they had driven to the glacier, as it had been in their son's pocket when he was buried under tons of ice. Story 33. During lockdown, Advanced 365 made 100 people redundant. The chief executive officer, Gordon Wilson, bought himself a Bentley soon afterwards. Story 34. Nestle's plan to promote the sale of baby formula involved giving away free baby formula to new mothers in developing countries. Then the mother's milk supply dried up, so the only thing they could feed the babies was more formula, which they could not afford. As a result, the babies starved. Story 35. This is happening right now and has been going on for decades. Health insurers in the United States are financially rewarded for denying care to people. It is not like they are saying, spending on X would be more effective than Z. It is literally, spend as little as possible, even if people will die, so we can profit. The Affordable Care Act required preventative care that was estimated to save 20,000 years of life every year. The Republican Party has fought against this and similar changes that require insurance to actually be effective for the last 15 years while offering no alternative. Story 36. Stock buybacks are essentially a black hole of currency where an asset can grow technically while creating an imbalance in liability. This is atrocious from a fundamental economic standpoint in every way. Story 37. Terminate a long-term but not senior employee who required guidance on the company medical plan and needed a significant amount of time off. His termination resulted in the loss of decades of department knowledge. Story 38. Worked for a big box craft shop. Truth be told, the craft supplies really were not their moneymaker. It was the framing shop. Every time a new store opened, all the mom and pop framing shops in the area closed because they could not compete with the 50% off coupons. Just after we opened, a month prior to Christmas, we were absolutely swamped with 50% off framing orders. The daily frame shop sales were setting records, which were going to result in a nice management bonus. There was not enough room for the full crew to work at the same time, so the framing manager and two of her staff members decided to pull a few after-hours shifts to frame, clean up, organize, and restock. I worked in the office doing payroll. The store manager made me deduct a half hour each from their time cards and classify it as a lunch break. They were not sitting around for a half hour in the middle of the night eating, but without the 30-minute break reflected in the time card, it would go against the management bonus. Story 39. That assumes there is a consistent scale. I find it difficult knowing apartments with asbestos can still be rented. It becomes an issue when renovations are done. Epinephrine injectors ended up being very high-priced because of the injector device, not the medication. There will always be challenges. Story 40. Investment based on double preferred stock options at a very aggressive valuation. To summarize, unless the high valuation is achieved, the founders could end up with almost nothing for all their hard work. Story 41. Probably all the damage done to migrants through industrialized agriculture. Everyone ends up on dialysis funded by the government, without consequences for those responsible. Story 42. The amount of wrapped and used food we threw away every shift at Sam's Club was incredible. I used to work the sample carts. Story 43. At 18 years old, now 32, I was working for a popular fast food restaurant known for selling Americanized tacos and featuring a Chihuahua mascot. I contracted mononucleosis. I received a doctor's note stating I was not allowed to work for 2 weeks due to the contagious nature of the illness. I confirmed with my manager that my mother could bring in the note to meet the doctor's note requirement, as I did not want to enter a food establishment while still contagious. There was no issue with this arrangement. After the 2 weeks, I called my manager to ask about my next shift. She seemed happy that I was finally able to return. On the day of my shift, I drove 20 minutes to work, only to find that my shifts had been reduced to 2 days a week, each lasting only 30 minutes, for the next month. My manager said she could not give me more hours because I had taken so much time off, which she said showed a lack of effort on my part. I would have preferred to be fired rather than waste gas driving for a 30-minute shift. Story 44. The company that let the crew die in an underwater pipe instead of sending help also prevented other help from being sent. Took them days to die. The company knew the whole time. Edit, Paria diving tragedy. Story 45. Buy out a nature preserve and level it down to new build luxury apartments that soon turned into another ghetto or project housing, thus increasing the crime rates once again, one of many factors to be honest. Story 46. I'm not sure if it was legal, but my stepfather's employer tried to impose the cost of a car accident, company car, company time, company business, on him. I pressured the employer when it was clear he would get away with it. Successfully. Story 47. Walgreens suddenly restarted their very important person points and bonus buck system without warning. I lost nearly $70 after 2 decades of saving them up. You can only spend $5 per visit. When they restarted it, it was exactly the same system, just with a zero balance. Story 48. I have seen many upsetting things, but this ranks among the worst. Years ago, I witnessed the dismissal of about 100 employees at a divisional office of a large corporation. Each employee arrived at work on a Monday morning, accompanied by armed security guards who escorted them to their desks. They were told to collect only their personal belongings in a plastic container and then escorted out the building, being informed that their employment was terminated and they could not return. Some employees had served the company for over 20 years and were deeply dedicated. It was incredibly distressing to see such good people treated this way, and it was psychologically devastating for all involved. Thinking about it still angers me. Story 49. Require employees to reapply for their current positions under the guise of a reorganization procedure, then reject them by claiming they are unfit for the job. This ultimately leads to the employee resigning, so the company avoids having to terminate them. Story 50. The theme park where I worked laid off a large portion of middle management weeks before Christmas. They were warned that if they complained, they would receive no severance. Now, I wonder how legal that entire situation was. They were known for this kind of mismanagement. Story 51. The company held a celebration for a new contract with a free bar. The next day, several employees were randomly selected for drug and alcohol testing and were subsequently terminated. Story 52. I worked for a company during the financial crisis. They sent a company-wide email stating there would be no bonuses or raises that year due to the economy, using flowery language about being in it together and coming back stronger next year. Then they invited us to the company meeting a few days later. The meeting started with all the executives being awarded huge bonuses as a reward for their cost-cutting measures. Those bonuses could have easily financed pay raises for the entire company, but instead, they rewarded themselves and rubbed it in our faces. Story 53. Health practice occupational therapists, psychologists, speech therapists, and music therapists company went bankrupt. We were informed on the day of closure that we would not be paid for the last 2 weeks of work. Additionally, superannuation payments were not made. Access to the operating system was locked, preventing contact with high-risk, vulnerable clients. Clients reached out to me on LinkedIn for months requesting reports they had paid for prior to the business closing. Story 54. My company went into a form of bankruptcy, and when a new company bought us, they had a 12-hour window during which they owned us, but we were still broke. They used that 12-hour window to fire 1/5 of our staff because they were not legally required to provide severance packages. Story 55. Burger King fired a manager I know after he worked there for about 40 years. He started when he was 16. When he got close to retirement, they fired him because an employee in the drive-thru had a small cut and got blood on a customer's bag without realizing it. I believe they were just looking for a reason so they would not have to pay his retirement. That is what large corporations sometimes do. It is wrong. Story 56. During Hurricane Katrina, many homes suffered severe flood damage. All their claims were denied because the damage was classified as flood damage. For context, homeowners are not required to have flood insurance if they are not in a flood zone. New Orleans, despite being below sea level, was not in a flood zone. Therefore, most insurance companies could easily deny water damage claims since the damage was caused by flooding. Story 57. Mail me my layoff letter just a couple of weeks before I was supposed to come back from the Family and Medical Leave Act. It was my 10-year work anniversary. I had brain surgery. I had to sign away any potential legal action I might have had to receive severance. Story 58. I used to work in Michigan at a Fred Meyer store where there were no labor laws. Basically, everyone was either in a union or losing money because they had to pay union dues anyway. To qualify for health insurance, you needed to work full-time, which was 32 hours a week, every week for a month. Then you were considered a full-time employee. This was negotiated by the union. My coworkers and I were scheduled to work 39 hours for weeks 1 through 3, and then 31 hours for the 4th week. Story 59. Companies move pregnant employees to different positions to encourage them to resign. This allows the company to avoid paying insurance costs. Story 60. Hire people as casual contractors on an hourly rate that does not include penalty rates, then let them go without notice. Story 61. Steve Jobs and his team visited Xerox. They realized Xerox was sitting on a gold mine, which inspired the idea for the graphical user interface and the computer mouse. Story 62. I worked for a healthcare agency that closed with absolutely no notice. The parent company, a construction business unrelated to the agency's work, decided to impose $500,000 of debt on the agency it owned. They acted very unfairly. Story 63. Current company. Everyone's roles are capable of being done remotely. We have a work from home Wednesday. Their most loyal employee of 8 years recently got married. Her husband's mother and stepmother had cancer and only a few days to live. She wanted to work remotely to be there when her husband's mother passes so he is not alone. Otherwise, she would have to take the bus home, which takes a while since she does not drive. The boss asked her to justify why she needs to work from home during this time and offered her 2 days a week temporarily. Story 64. Have your company slogan be "Don't be evil," and then, almost 2 decades later, say, "No, we are evil now." Story 65. My husband was a soldier. They were not on deployment or getting ready to deploy. His friend's children went missing in Montana, and we were in Georgia. The commander would not allow him to leave. The friend threatened to leave without authorization to join the search. A while later, they finally allowed him to go. That day, his children had been found killed by their mother. Story 66. I worked in fast food as a manager. I attended meetings where they explained that we do not fire people because then we have to pay for their unemployment benefits. Instead, we reduce their hours so much that they are forced to find a new job or quit. Then we were told to use this as a threat, saying things like, "Jimmy, if you are 5 minutes late again, I will have to reduce your scheduled hours." I never did this and found it very wrong. Story 67. Elon Musk is running his supercomputer on methane gas generators, causing an ecological disaster in Tennessee. Story 68. You should see people being dragged out of their homes, kicking and screaming, by police officers who are there to evict them because they can no longer make payments on a loan they took out decades ago. The bank has recovered the principal and more, but interest continues to accumulate. The law allows them to evict these people in this manner. You should have predicted the next 30 years better. Now you are homeless. Story 69. The World of Darkness tabletop role-playing game has a company named Pentex, which has the following motto: the cost of compliance is always more than the cost of a fine. Many companies seem to operate with that same motto. Story 70. American Automobile Association charges you extra if you sign up at the side of the road just to get help, like $75. In fact, if you sign up on the spot but do not receive help with the roadside issue and call again for the same issue within 72 hours, they still charge you the extra fee, assuming it is the same issue. Story 71. Everything Nestle has done in the past 50 years, specifically the baby formula scandal they had going in the 70s and 80s in developing countries, is deeply troubling. The people in charge of Nestle acted in an unethical and harmful manner. I have many thoughts about what should happen to the leadership of the company, but I will refrain from expressing them to avoid consequences. Story 72. I was fired from an information technology managed service provider, and they wanted me to sign paperwork that would have required me to pay for their lawyer fees to fight me over my own unemployment if I had to claim it. Story 73. The company where my mom worked for about a decade fired her while she was on a lengthy sick leave due to two separate issues: knee operations and cancer treatment. She had declared she would be fit to return to work in a month, when the sick leave would end. Apparently, she was out for more than half the time since signing her last contract, so the termination was considered valid. The workplace fired a couple of people over 50 in a similar fashion, but they followed the law to the letter. They ensured they could not be accused of group firings or violating the near-retirement protective period. We all understood what they were doing, but they executed it flawlessly. No lawyer we consulted found anything to challenge in court. Story 74. Not even sure how this is legal, but my son had to register as self-employed to work for a man fitting bespoke stone kitchen worktops. He was on a day rate, but his employer would deduct 20% to cover his end-of-year tax bill. This meant all the workers received a significant tax rebate at the end of every financial year. That seemed odd to me. The kicker was that some days he would finish early, so his day rate worked out okay. Other days, he would be out of the house for 14 hours or more, leaving before 5 a.m. and getting home at 5, 6, 7, or later in the evening. This meant his day rate, after the 20% deduction by his employer, worked out to less than £6 an hour. He started the company 7 years prior and left on £10 a day more than when he started. I inquired, and apparently it's all above board and legal. Story 75. Contractors on our building sites will dismiss the apprentices on the final day before the Christmas break to avoid paying them for the time off. In the United Kingdom, some places have around 7 to 14 days off, including weekends. They then rehire the apprentices after the Christmas break. The dismissed apprentices need a job, so they must rejoin. Story 76. Retirees could stay on company health insurance until Medicare if they gave back 120 days of paid sick time at the time of retirement. Many people did. Then the company decided they could not honor the contract. Employees sued. The court said the company could discontinue the insurance if employees paid back some of the sick time. They did so at discounted hourly rates, leaving many people in their 50s without insurance. Story 77. The companies that continue to sell asbestos products in countries where it is not yet prohibited. We know it causes cancer, and they will probably face appropriate laws in those countries as well, but they continue to expose people to harm. The same applies to tobacco companies. Story 78. Maybe falls in the justified but evil category. My old company had a large contract where the period of performance ran through June 25th. Higher-ups would tell you everything was going well, and we were guaranteed to get the follow-on work. But the boots on the ground all knew things were going sideways. The customer decided not to renew and also to end the contract 6 months early for lack of performance. Last day on task was Christmas Day. A lot of us made it out, but there were at least a handful who were laid off as they were opening presents. Story 79. Ford left the Pinto on the road because they thought the costs of death benefits would be cheaper than the recall. Story 80. Intentionally pricing medication just under the threshold for insurance coverage. Ours priced an inhaler 76 cents below the coverage level, which would have cost us almost $100. Story 81. Harassed a coworker until they attempted suicide. Fabricated evidence, spread rumors, destroyed their reputation, pretended to help through an employee assistance program, had him admit to a series of flaws, and then used that for further harassment. Apparently, it was only illegal if he had actually died. Story 82. Back in the early 1980s, there was a branch of a software and accounting company in Tucson, Arizona, with about 150 people. They faced a challenging project with an end-of-year deadline, having only a couple of months to complete it. The team gave their best effort, with many working long hours and weekends. The company offered free pizza and hinted at possible bonuses, though nothing was written. Normal vacation days around Thanksgiving and Christmas were cut short, but the final test phase was completed on December 28th. More pizza was provided. The entire staff was then told to take the following week off with pay. The Monday after, they met with human resources and security, completed exit interviews, and were escorted to their workstations with boxes to pack their belongings. Story 83. Exxon scientists in the 1970s discovered high levels of carbon dioxide and its effect on climate change. Exxon, in turn, funded climate denial research and spread false information, exactly like Big Tobacco did in denying that cigarettes cause cancer. Story 84. Vegas in the 1990s watched a dealer clean out a borderline unconscious drunk at the blackjack table. He could barely keep up and place his chips. The moment his giant stack of chips was erased, security showed up and asked him to leave for being obviously intoxicated. The casino was named after a pink bird. Story 85. See employees comfortable at their jobs, so invent a sweeping plan to fire people without reason. Government regulation. Story 86. I interviewed with a lawn chemical treatment company that expected to pay me nothing for doing the work. I was required to leave flyers in any neighborhoods I was sent to, and I would supposedly be paid a commission on any contracts resulting from leaving those flyers. They avoided paying by classifying us as independent contractors. Story 87. This is not a company, but an activity aimed at attracting companies to the area. In central Indiana, the state's Economic Development Commission is in the process of securing 9 square miles of land to be used for a massive technology park called Indiana Leap. Individuals with farmland and homes in the area were approached by the state and received offers to relocate. Large landowners and farmers received favorable offers. For some homeowners, the situation was challenging because their offers were barely enough to replace what they had, let alone compensate them for the significant hassle of moving. Many accepted offers out of concern that if they did not take a buyout, eminent domain might be used on holdouts. I know a family that received an offer for their property and house. After careful consideration, they accepted the offer and signed a contract with the state. The contract included a 2-year window giving the state the option to back out if it wished. At the 21-month mark, the state confirmed its intention to purchase the property. After purchasing a new home, the family was informed by the state that it was withdrawing the offer at the last minute. After the turmoil of deciding to sell their property, they now own 2 homes, one of which is adjacent to the technology park where major construction will continue for years. The likelihood of finding a buyer for the original property is low. Although the contract allowed the state to withdraw, it was disappointing that the state exercised that option. Story 88. Okay, thank you for the explanation. I wonder if this was because they train in your jurisdiction. As guests, they must follow your rules. Have a good day. Story 89. I worked for a high-end clothing company's distribution warehouse in the early 2000s. They advertised $20 per hour and benefits, but this only started after a 90-day probation period. Initially, employees were hired at $13 per hour. The company would hire 15 to 20 pickers and then fire everyone on day 89 of the probation period. The core longtime crew was threatened with termination if they told any of the new employees what was coming. Story 90. Any capitalistic hoarding of profits, while the rest of the world starves in their freezing houses. So all capitalism then. Story 91. Terminate an employee for having a disability and requesting accommodations. It was a non-profit organization that helped people with disabilities. Story 92. Tesla shut down their Detroit engineering office with a blog post in 2008, firing most of the staff and telling the rest that they could relocate to California at their own expense. Story 93. Do not pay workers, especially minors, for staying overtime until their overtime exceeds 30 minutes. Story 94. Buc-ee's pays employees weekly, then schedules them to work 8 to 13 days in a row at 37.5 hours per week to avoid paying both overtime and benefits. They advertise a starting pay of $18 per hour, but it is actually $16. They also advertise a 6% 401k match, which does not take effect until after 1 year of employment. Employees in every department, from cashiers to stockers to deli workers, are forced to clean floors and bathrooms despite the existence of an entire maintenance department. It is company policy that clocking in even 1 minute late results in immediate termination, even if it is accidental or due to waiting for access to the time clock. According to a source whose husband worked there in his early 20s, Buc-ee's sued a salaried manager for breach of contract after firing her before her contract ended in the early 2010s and won the case. Additionally, a corrupt, wealthy certified registered nurse anesthetist aunt used travel nursing during the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse for luxury vacations. Flying was prohibited unless you were a travel medical professional, so she either lied about having a contract or used a legitimate travel nurse contract to travel to locations like Dubai while working. Reporting her to the Board of Nursing resulted in no response. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.